You're watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to the 10, presented by Bet Rivers, a weekly Big Ten basketball podcast, part of the Bet Rivers Network. It's that beautiful time of the year, all day Big Ten basketball, and we're here to bet it and help you win some money on your wagers from start to finish. The Big Ten tournament is rolling right now. I'm your host, Greg Waddell. I'm joined by Doug Kazarian and Troy Macker. We've got four great games for Friday. There's 18 teams in this conference. 15 of them made this conference tournament, and yet somehow, some way, we have the top 8 seeds still playing when we get to the final 8 teams in this tournament. Maybe we could have trimmed this to 8, gentlemen, but I'm excited as a fan of this league, as someone who likes to make some money on these teams. The 8 best teams will be playing in the final 3 days of this tournament. Should be a blast. Doug, just give me some general thoughts. What have you seen the first couple days of this Big Ten tournament?
Well, what I've seen everywhere is that it's March's Madness, right? We know this, but we need reminders of it. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, as you ratchet up the interest and the gambling because the interest is higher, it's really the time where it's the trickiest because it's madness and thus, expect the unexpected. So you kind of have to lean into that at times, but it really is a different animal than the regular season. And it's just requires a lot more thinking outside the box. And that has certainly been applicable in this conference tournament. Teams can get hot and look the part that didn't look the part at all throughout the regular season. I mean, look at USC taking Purdue down to the wire, right? This is a team that was mismatched in a lot of games and recently gave up 95 to Rutgers in the regular season. But it's a team that obviously showed up, had the pieces. Maybe the bench shortens. Maybe teams are allowed to get better, which we often forget about in all college sports, whether it be football and basketball. The end of the season, it's a much different team than the start of the season. So these are all things that you have to put into the equation rather than just a game-to-game during the regular season when they're traveling and playing a road or a home game.
Troy, what's your biggest takeaway from the first 2 days of the Big Ten tournament?
Yeah, I think it's probably that, we have the top 8 seeds here, kind of echoing Doug's point. March is madness, but across all conference tournaments, we're seeing a huge clip of higher seeds winning. They're winning games at about 88%. We don't see that all that often in conference tournaments. We're seeing a lot more, 1 through 4s in semifinals. Now, the difference is that a lot of these games are tight. On Thursday, I would guess that over 50% of the games were decided by 6 points or fewer. That's 2 possessions. So we're still getting the madness. We're just not getting a lot of the upsets. And the thing about the conference tournaments that's trickiest for me is I'm a huge follower of trends, especially beginning of the year where you can get trends before the bookmakers really pick up on them. And then, looking at some of the trends in the middle of the season when there's just so many games going on. Well, trends kind of get erased because you're going back to neutral site courts where you haven't been playing in a while. Things are, like you said, things are tight. People are running into those walls. And so it's really hard to use the last 3 to 4 weeks to make a prediction on a neutral site game played in the afternoon a lot of times. So it's really learning as you go. But this year, we're not getting the 13, 14, 15 seeds making deep runs in a lot of the power conferences. So it does help you where you get more even matchups where you can use some of those trends or last games from earlier in the year.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think my excitement for these final 3 days in this tournament is that we're going to watch the best teams compete. And there were quite a few teams coming into this week that had bubble implications. Ohio State was one. Nebraska didn't even make the Big Ten tournament, but needed one win to get there. And, I think this league has touted its depth all season long. It's a league where anyone can truly beat anyone any given night. But I also think at this point in the season, you could argue at least 6 of these teams that are still playing in this tournament are playing some of their best basketball that we've seen. And I do think there's a difference in the level of the top 8 teams that we're going to watch going forward than the teams that were 9 through 15 that were here. And while USC gave some spirited efforts, while even a team like Northwestern was able to drag that Wisconsin game into the mud for the first 10, 15 minutes, there's a caliber difference. There are roughly 6 to 7, maybe even 8 teams in this league that it would not surprise us if they made a second weekend in the NCAA tournament, and they've shown some of that upside, at least up till this point. We'll see how the 4 teams with a double bye fare once we get into Friday's action. Without further ado, let's get into our handicaps for these games. We start with the first game of the day. That would be the 1 seed Michigan State versus the 8 seed Oregon Ducks. Michigan State favored by 5.5 points at Bet Rivers. Oregon plus 195 on the money line. The total is at 144.5. If you listened to the Big Ten Network's post-game show, you heard TJ Bamba say that it's been a talking point for Oregon. They wanted another shot at Michigan State. They were hoping to even get the 8 seed over the 7 seed so that they could see the Spartans again after blowing a 14-point halftime lead at the Breslin Center the first time these two teams faced off. Doug, what do you make of this matchup tonight? Excuse me.
I watched that entire game, and it was compelling to see what Richardson did in the second half and really took over. And I think I like Sparty, and I respect what Bomba's saying and how they want this game. But I think the last time I checked, it is the month of March, and that means Izzo is going to thrive and excel, and he'll have his guys ready. And the Ducks shot the lights out, and I was impressed with their ability to take Indiana's punch back, that they rallied back, tied the game, things like that in the second half, and then punched back. That says a lot, and it's Dana Altman, and I don't want to sleep on that, but the number feels a little cheap. I do. I think I don't love Sparty's ability ability to shoot the 3. That might be something that does them in come tournament time in the deeper rounds, but I don't think it's going to rear its ugly head. They did a nice job on Biddle in that regular season meeting, and I understand that they want a shot back at the Spartans, but you can say things, but when you have demonstrated an ability to buckle and things like that, now this is not at the Breslin Center, but I do think if certain runs by Michigan State get going, I do think it can snowball from there against Oregon. So I'll lay the 5.5, somewhat cautiously, but not entirely cautiously. I think it's a pretty solid play.
Yeah, I think any bet against Dana Altman at this point on the schedule is one you could say caution is the right approach, right? We laid this out in yesterday's episode of the 10. His record in these tournaments has been sensational. Tom Izzo's record in March speaks for itself over his 25-year career. To me, you look at what happened in the first game between these two teams. Oregon really punked them out of the gates, looked like they were going to run them off their own floor. At that point in the year, we really didn't know that Michigan State was destined for a Big Ten championship. They were not the team that had started featuring Jace Richardson just yet. In fact, I believe that was Jace Richardson's first start of the season in that Oregon game. And it only happened because Jeremy Fears Jr., their normal starting point guard, was unavailable for that game. And when I went back and watched some film on that game, not having Fears made a lot of sense for the game script, because if you pay attention to Michigan State games, Jeremy Fears is extremely integral to setting the tone emotionally for this Michigan State team that has an unbelievable competitive edge, as they've demonstrated, kind of taking the Grim Reaper meme to Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois and Purdue back to back to back to back. He's a psychopath, just like Trey Holloman is, just like Jaden Akins is, but he really is sort of the floor general leader type that their defense especially thrives off of. Not having him against Oregon, I think, was a huge portion of why Oregon's guards specifically had a huge first half. Jackson Shellstad's shot making in the first half was unbelievable. Now in the second half, even without Jeremy Fears, you saw the Michigan State defense do its thing. Trey Holloman and Jaden Akins stepped up, made it incredibly tough on Shellstad, who really had minimal impact, if any impact, in the second half of that game. And in 10 minutes, a 14-point lead turned into a 2-point deficit for Michigan State. I just think this is a team you don't want to piss off. And quite frankly, if you're wondering how motivated Michigan State will be, they're going to be motivated after hearing what TJ Bamba had to say and with how good those guards are defensively. I just think it's a good matchup because they've got 4 guys they can throw at Shellstad, wear him down over the course of a game. The last note I would add on this, 5.5 as a number to me doesn't scare me at all. If you think Michigan State's going to win this game, you should love that number. As you said, Doug, it's a favorable number. 9 of their last 10 wins in Big Ten play, they've covered 5.5. Some of these games have been close games where, maybe it's tied with 5 or 6 minutes left. the final 4 minutes, the Michigan State defense just cuts teams off. They have to extend games at the free throw line, but they are the 14th best free throw shooting team in the entire country. When they need to extend games late, they always extend games late. So even if it is close late, I think Michigan State can cover the number. Doug, I'm tailing this one with you. Troy, what betting insights do you have for us on Michigan State versus Oregon?
Yeah, so I think it's not ludicrous to say, as you guys have said, that we could see Michigan State winning this game. What is a little bit surprising is that 95% of the money and 91% of the tickets is on Michigan State to win. We've taken some really early large bets, a couple bets of 2,500 or more on Michigan State to win. The value on them to win is not great, minus 245. And it's only 5.5, and we're seeing 58% of the money and 53% of the tickets on Michigan State to cover. And that is a little bit more realistic, in my opinion, just from how people bet. But the fact is, Michigan State is consistently one of our most wagered on teams this season at Bet Rivers. For it to be this strong on an Oregon team, as we've discussed, is playing very well now, has a coach who's done this before, and they do have some size, and you do need size against Michigan State. Even though Michigan State's not a big team, they bully people around, as you guys mentioned. Go back and watch the Maryland game where they won on the Trey Holloman, a half-court shot. Maryland, a bigger team in the front court, has 2 6'10" guys, and they were eating them alive. There was, on every possession, it seemed like there was a shot block. I think it's just interesting to see how much confidence there is in Michigan State, which I think we agree upon that you should be confident in them. But from an early betting public, there's a lot of confidence, not really giving too much credence to Oregon. The more interesting one for me, and it's tricky because the over-under line is 144.5. That's not very big, but Michigan State is one of the best teams to the under this year. 10 and 21, 21 to the under. Oregon is 16 and 16. But all the numbers indicate that this game is going to be an under. We're looking at money. 76% of the money and 80% of the tickets are on the over, and that is not really strong for early betting on overs because everyone loves to bet overs. So if I'm looking at some trends to help me bounce off those percentages, 11 of 14 Michigan State games have gone under. 6 of Oregon's last 7 games have gone under. The under has hit in 3 of Michigan State's 5 neutral court games this season. They've played the most neutral court games this year. It's on the low end at 144.5. It's not in 139.5 as some of the quarterfinal Big Ten games were. But I would lean on the under here because I think Michigan State is going to grind it out. They do not take a lot of threes. They're not very good at taking a lot of 3-pointers, and they're going to be the ones that dictate this pace. So I'm undecided on the spread, but I am markedly more decided on this game being low scoring.
And I don't know how much truth there is to this either, but just something I wanted to gut feel run by, just the results of this tournament. Sometimes the earliest game of the day in Gainbridge Fieldhouse can be the sleepy basketball game as well. Now, there's probably not a huge correlation here long term, but body clocks 12 p.m. with a West Coast team can be a thing as well. Both of the first 2 games of this tournament, pretty low scoring games with some ugly shooting numbers. That Northwestern Minnesota game, I believe, ended up around 70 to 60, and it was just a bunch of teams that couldn't make a 3-point shot. We've seen Michigan State go cold from 3 this year. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting call out, Troy. I wouldn't hate an underplay in this game either, but either way, this should be a very entertaining basketball game. 2 teams that I think will be looking forward to this one, as will most Big Ten fans and bettors across the country. Let's move to the second game. On Friday, the 4-5 matchup, we're looking at UCLA against Wisconsin. We've got Wisconsin minus 1.5, a slight money line favorite, minus 114 at Bet Rivers if you want to back the Badgers versus minus 107 to back the Bruins. The total is 141.5. Where are you going with this one, Doug?
I like the Badgers. I think Mick Cronin's had enough time to travel and not complain about having to get on a plane and fly across country, although this is only in the Midwest. They're going to want revenge. They lost at UCLA by a bucket. I just think the Badgers have more firepower. UCLA's got some nice pieces, and I think Cronin can push the buttons for the right amount of time, but the right buttons, I should say, but not for the full 40, and that's ultimately what concerns me now. Wisconsin, the last couple games, we've seen them at their peak, and then not be consistent throughout the entire game. And I want to give more Northwestern credit for the comeback than I do want to knock on the Badgers, but obviously Wisconsin did not deliver in their regular season finale against Penn State. I think the Badgers prevail here. It's going to be a rock fight, and frankly, the under in this game is probably the way to go. I think UCLA is going to defend. 141 neighborhood feels high, although they did play a high-scoring game in the regular season. I just don't believe in UCLA's ability to do that, especially having not played, and they're coming in to the tournament sort of cold turkey. Obviously, they had a big win against USC over the weekend, but some of those teams looking ahead to the conference tournament have one foot out the door in the regular season if it doesn't really do a whole lot. I think this game's going to be played in the 60s. I think Wisconsin wins. I lean to the under as well, but I'll take Wisconsin on the money line here.
It's a tough one for me. I think Wisconsin's definitively the better basketball team. Like I want to talk myself confidently into the Badgers here. Came into this tournament thinking we would see Wisconsin make the semifinals rather comfortably. Did not really like what I saw from Wisconsin against Northwestern. Now, they did stretch it out. I think it was a 16-point lead with about 4 minutes left, and kind of some wonky endgame stuff kept that game close to a Northwestern 7-point loss. But to me, you mentioned the inconsistency. Tanji and Blackwell especially had stretches of the season where they were 20 points a night guys, and it hasn't been that way for the last month of the season. I don't really see anyone talking about Wisconsin's inconsistencies. I think they kind of ended up getting credit from people that really do watch the Big Ten as like the second best team in this league. The analytics back that up. It's Michigan State, and then it's Wisconsin, and then it's everybody else. And they just haven't played to that since their loss at the Breslin Center. I do think it's one of those things, kind of like a Michigan situation where you're thinking you're a contender, kind of get humbled by the champs, and you haven't really picked up the pieces yet. The only difference is I don't know that anyone's noticed that with this Wisconsin team yet. Tanji was really going through the motions in the first game. He ended up with a pretty sleepy 18 points in that game, I thought. Blackwell, for me, I think 8 points. He really just kind of no-showed. It was not a very rhythmic performance from him offensively, and Nolan Winter was kind of the guy that dominated Northwestern. Wisconsin's the team that goes too big with Winter and Crowell. I think that actually begs Mick Cronin to play the personnel that's best for Mick Cronin. If he gets a Day Mara on the court, usually if it's a Day Mara matchup, that means better upside for UCLA than when they have to go small. And Mara was sensational. The one time these two teams did play at Pauley Pavilion, he was a Ken Pom MVP off the bench, 22 points in 21 minutes with 2 blocks. So I do think we'll see a little Mara, and I think that means good things for UCLA. For me, it's a coin flip game. I don't think there's value on either side as a slight favorite, so it's a stay away for me at the number. I am liking the under, though, Doug, and it is a little scary because it was 168 total points at Pauley Pavilion the first time. But Wisconsin shot the lights out. I mentioned Blackwell and Tanji, 23 and 24 points individually in that game. These two have not been those guys since. And I think the game script here really is what Northwestern was able to do against Wisconsin. You've got to play the game on your terms if you are the slower tempo team. Wisconsin is a team that at their best, they will gladly get out and run more than any Wisconsin team has since I've been alive. But they are also kind of comfortable going back in their shell and playing games on a slow tempo's team's terms. That's what Northwestern did. That's how they were able to keep this close at times in the first half. And I think that's the method here for UCLA. You don't want to get out and run the way you did at Pauley Pavilion and start to see those Badgers making shots. So to me, UCLA, they're going to go big in this game. They're going to be able to slow it down. They are a very, very slow half-court offense when they want to be. In this game, they should want to be. We'll see exactly what it looks like, but my only lean here that I'm comfortable enough to put on the card is the under 141.5. Troy, what insights do you have for us?
Yeah, well, I think throughout the last shows we've done, I've presented my case in most games for going under, especially in conference tournament play. And I think you guys are right on the nose here. 74% of the money and 75% of the tickets are on the over. And as I've discussed earlier, anything below 80% early before game towards the over, leads me to believe that is very undecided. It is not the same 80% club as you see on a spread play, where that is far more decided. So, while we will take more money in tickets, getting closer to tip-off to the over, because that's how people bet, I think there are some metrics that indicate that the under is the play. The under is hit in 4 of Wisconsin's last 6 games, and UCLA has held its opponents to 69 or less points, and I think it's like 9 of their last 12. That has a lot to do with their ramped-up defense and Mick Cronin being crazy about getting his players to squeeze every ounce of effort and energy in every single game, and their pace of play. The one concern I have about Wisconsin is over the last 15 years, even the casual fans, when they turn on the tournament, they see Wisconsin. They know their identity. They know they can trust them. They know even if they're a 6 seed, they can make a deep run. They were one of the most trustworthy teams of the last 10 years and a very slow pace of play team. This year, they're getting up and down a lot more. And what we've seen in the last month and a half, there might not be another more untrustworthy team in the top 20 in the country. I cannot trust the Badgers, which is a very odd thing to say because I've only been trusting them basically my entire adult life to pick up a win when we don't think so. It's stay away on the money line. It's stay away on the spread, and agreed with you guys that I think the under is the way to go.
All right. Love to see some agreement from our panel here. That's a good sign. We're in postseason form right now, gentlemen. I like it. Let's move to our third game for Friday. This one screams entertainment value. The 2 seed, the Maryland Terps, versus the 7-seeded Illinois Fighting Illini. Maryland, a slight favorite here, -1.5. -130 on the money line. You are getting Illinois at plus money, +110 outright. The over-under at 159.5. Doug, I'm very excited for your thoughts on this one. What do you got?
So we kind of talked about Wisconsin had peaked too early in the season and is sort of inconsistent of late. I think Maryland's peaking at the right time. They're just on a roll. And I don't know if it's just coincidence of the schedule and things like that, but they've won 7 of 8 with their lone loss, a 1-possession loss to Sparty at home. And this is a team that won by 20 at Illinois and Champaign, and I don't think it was that outlier of a performance. And if you look at it, so maybe there was the turnovers were by the Illini, but I said this in our previous show, and what gave me concern about the Illini laying the lumber against Iowa is that Brad Underwood, for being an awesome coach, he's not a guy who I sit there and say this guy's a horrible coach or anything, but I don't understand why they shoot so many threes and don't pound the paint. So in their previous meeting with Maryland, they lost by 21. They had 2.5 times the amount of 3-point attempts as the Terps, just chucking and ducking. So it's not even like Maryland got hot from 3 and buried it. They just took what the defense gave them, made shots, protected the ball, which was a big difference, and won going away. So I'm on Maryland here. I think Illinois did fine. They're kind of in a groove. I just think they're kind of they're ripe for get hit in the mouth, and I think the Terps are going to do that. I think Maryland's the better team. I'll take them.
So I agree with much of what you said here. Over the course of the season, Maryland's certainly been the better team. Upside-wise in March, 2 very tantalizing teams that I do think could win multiple games, maybe get to a second or even a third weekend if the bracket breaks right. Here's where I'm going to disagree a little bit, Doug, and I don't know how much I'm going to put on this, but I'm going to sprinkle Illinois money line here, even if it's just a gut feel play. They didn't have Tomovicic in the first matchup, and he is so important to the best version of Illinois. Now, they've had so many injury issues and sicknesses, and I don't know if they are healthy still. The injury sheet, the roster sheet would tell you they finally are. Merez Johnson played 12 minutes off the bench in their win over Iowa, so, eye test-wise, they look healthier than they've been. I'm not really someone that buys that injuries have been the big excuse for what's gone wrong with Illinois' season as is. I think they have some identity issues beyond that, but I do buy that Tomovicic is the most important player to this team. And that sounds a little bit crazy with how good Kasperius Yakashonis can be, but they've got secondary ball handlers. When you pull Tomislav Ivicic off this team, they lose what makes them special. He is a 7-foot, legitimate NBA-sized center that shoots like a shooting guard. I mean, he is the best set shooter for Illinois. I think against the Maryland two big lineups in the first game, when you didn't have that player who could drag them out to the perimeter, you were essentially trying to go big for big with Merez Johnson. Give him credit. He's a tough kid, but he's undersized. He's not the lottery pick that Derek Queen is, and he's not the veteran that Julian Reese is. And Benham Rickhouse, as a front court counterpart, certainly was not providing any help at that point in the season. So to me, as good as Maryland looked in that game and has looked this season, I totally agree with you, Doug. They've been really the most consistently second or third best team in this league behind Michigan State. To me, you've got to throw that result almost out the window and look at what this team has been with Ivisic playing the way he has in the last four. He hit 2 threes immediately off the bat against Iowa last night, and it was like, okay, this team's not really as rusty as we thought they might be. I expect him to have a huge role in this game. I think he's the perfect big that can cause problems for Maryland's bigs. Derek Queen is certainly a versatile guy, but he's a guy who can make some defensive lapses, and if you have to trust him to get out and guard the perimeter, I do think that hurts them quite a bit. And most importantly, you see I'm in the BYU shirt. I know this is the 10. It's a Big Ten show. But I've compared Illinois and BYU quite a bit this year, and if you're familiar with BYU, they've got another European star point guard very similar to Kasparis Yakashonis and Yegor Demin. And BYU spent about 2.5 months of the season trying to have Yegor Demin do everything, and it didn't work. It drove them off a cliff. It really made a lot of their role players into stand-and-watch players that weren't making an impact on the games. Illinois got caught in that exact same vortex with Kasparis. And guys like Kylan Boswell, Trey White, they were just not being utilized, and it turned them into a jump shot launching team. The scout is out on Kasparis. He wants step-back threes. He's not as comfortable getting all the way to the rim. This Iowa game in the first round was the first time all season that Illinois did not lean on Kasparis on a possession-by-possession basis to do everything. They put the ball in Will Riley's hands. They used him as a playmaker more. He had 5 assists. Tom Ivisic had 6 assists. Kasparis himself had 0 assists to 6 turnovers. It wasn't a good performance. And they were still definitively the best team, hanging 106 points on, yes, the Iowa defense. But listen, the bottom line is this. This is a version of Illinois we have not seen this year. And I'm going to buy that they've found something. And yes, there's a chance that I'm wrong, and Maryland, who's been the better team, is going to come in and shut me right up and humble this Illinois team. But I'm falling for the trap once again. You give me plus money, I'm going to sprinkle it and think that maybe they've made the same turnaround BYU did, where they skyrocketed up the odds sheets in the last month. We'll go to Troy. What insights do you have for us on this one?
Yeah, I tend to believe that Illinois is peaking at the right time. I was high on them heading into their matchup in the quarterfinals, and they, eked out covering 9.5. But really on the backs of they had illnesses, injuries, a really rough slate, 3 or 4 losses where they got blown out. And I do think they have the type of roster that you do need to shoot threes. I agree with Doug that maybe they shoot too many, but another concern for me is, and I don't know how much this really weighs in year to year because it's more of a program thing, but Maryland has not performed well in the Big Ten tournament. Certainly they have not been there for, all too long, but I don't believe they've won 2 games in the Big Ten tournament in any year. And certainly they're going in with probably their best team. But my other concern with Maryland is they only have 5 guys. Now, those 5 guys are their starters, and all of them average double figures. They might be the only team in the country where every starter has scored 20 in multiple games and been a leading scorer in multiple games. So this is, like you said, this is going to be an entertaining game. The metrics and the stats don't really give us a lot of trends, where the money and tickets are headed. Early action on Maryland, 80% of the money and 71% of the tickets on the Terps to win, 77% of the money and 75% of the tickets on the Terps to cover, 1.5, there's not a lot there. 54% of the money and 60% of the tickets are on the over. And I'm, been talking overs, unders all show. I'm going to focus on the over under again. This is 159.5. This is on the higher side, and the public is seeing that if 159.5 on the high side, and they're leaning slightly to the over. That lends me to believe that they're probably going to be on the under, and the under is the play here. I would believe, even though some of the the over is the play here, which is counterintuitive to the unders that I've been taking previous in the show. The over is hit in 5 of Illinois' 8 games with a total of 159 or more. So, in their games that they score points, they score lots of points. They put up triple digits in their last game. The total points line has gone over in 5 of Illinois' game as underdogs. Now, only a slight dog, but Maryland has a lottery pick in Derek Queen, and Julian Reese up front is also very capable of scoring, and they do like to shoot the three-pointer. In terms of spread, it's tricky. Maryland is 0-3 against the spread as favorites of 3 points or less. All of their losses are by 5 points or less. So I think there are some in-game plays here, especially Maryland likes to get out to an early lead. Let's say Illinois gets out to an early lead. If you think Illinois is going to win, they're not going to win by 6, 10, 15 points. It's going to be very tight. So I think there's some early in-game opportunities here at better value than what is currently being presented. But I do know that this should be the most entertaining game on the Big Ten slate. My one concern, and again, this is more, big picture, 30,000 foot, is when you look at what happened with Cooper Flagg at Duke. Duke, obviously in the tournament, obviously, a contender to win the national championship. Maryland, not on that same tier, but certainly, has a shot to make the Final Four. They have 5 guys. That is it. Their role players are reserves. Their sixth leader in minutes averages about 13 minutes a game. If they got off to a slow start, if someone rolls an ankle, do you shut it down? Do you say we're not going to quit on the game, but we're essentially not going to empty the tank trying to pick up this win? Potentially, Duke maybe would have done that yesterday. They eked out a win against Georgia Tech. Certainly, there's a bigger talent discrepancy between Duke and Georgia Tech than there is Maryland and Illinois. But that is something to think about. I think this game presents the most early in-game betting opportunities as opposed to trying to jump early on not a lot of value on the spread or the money line.
I could 100% see this being a game. Somebody jumps out to like a 12-2 lead, and either team, I'm immediately betting the team that's down
Correct.
10
Yes.
right away. I think this is going to be an awesome game for all parties involved. So I like the live shout, Troy. That's a good one. Okay, to our final game on Friday. The 3-seeded Michigan Wolverines will take on the 6-seeded Purdue Boilermakers. Purdue struggled against USC. This was much closer than I envisioned it being on yesterday's episode of the 10. The line that we are seeing is Purdue -2.5, and our total set at 146.5. Doug, what do you make of this one?
So this is a tough game. I mean, the Wolverines have lost 3 straight. They've been brutal against the number as well. What is it, 2-13 in their last 15? But this Purdue team, you mentioned, really battled with USC, and that's not surprising. We see teams play with nothing to lose. USC off the win, well coached with Musselman in terms of game plan, and Purdue's not a very deep team. Now, they did crush the Wolverines at Mackey, and then they had a close game at Chrysler. I think Michigan sort of circles the wagons here, and I have no sort of logic as to why they get the win. So I lean to them, but I think this is going to be a rock fight. We talked about it in the previous show, how teams that haven't played an arena, I think there's an element of rust, especially in the morning games, although this is a night game. I'm going to go under here. I think these offenses are going to, first of all, Michigan always plays tight games and things like that. We know that unless they get blown out. But I think we're going to see a low scoring. I'm on the under here.
I like the under angle, Doug. We're going to end in agreement here because that's my favorite play for this game as well. These teams met twice in the regular season, and 2 very different results, 2 very different game scripts. Purdue just absolutely eviscerated Michigan at Mackey Arena, one of the more embarrassing lopsided results that any quality team had this season. And then at Chrysler, Purdue was up 10 with 8 or 10 minutes left, something like that, and Michigan kind of stormed back and did the late game coin flip thing that they did for about 2 months and stole it away. Look, I think Purdue is kind of quietly struggling. Not as much as Michigan, but they're 2 and 5 in their last 7 against the spread. They have not been playing their best basketball to end the season, no doubt about it. And I came into this tournament thinking that Purdue was going to win this tournament largely because I love their draw, largely because if they take care of business in game 1, they get Michigan in game 2. It should be a bye to the semis. I'm not going to go completely away from my gut feel, but I will say this, just from my test of watching that game against USC, Painter did some uncharacteristic things that I wasn't expecting that weren't part of my handicap for Purdue to win this tournament. We saw some very early Will Berg minutes. Will Berg is a guy who hasn't taken his warm-ups off most games this season. I don't know if that was him coming into this game thinking, hey, I want to go really deep. Let's go outside of our normal rotation because we're not a deep team and we need to rest for the NCAA tournament. That's kind of what I saw here, which is not what I expected. And that terrifies me as someone that has a pre-tournament ticket on Purdue 7-1 to win this tournament. I think they can still do it. They're going to need great performances from Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith along the way. And the reality is this: Braden has a string of very iffy games right now. He's just been short on his jumpers for the better part of every second half in the last month. I don't know if it is fatigue. He played 40 minutes in the first game, which, I guess is a sign that if he's playing 40 minutes, they are here to try and win this thing. So I don't know what to handicap Purdue as mentally. That's what leads me to the underdog. I'm right there with you. This Michigan team cannot shoot the ball. They're shooting it worse than Illinois was for 2 months. And, I think Michigan has turnover issues and other issues that kind of distract us from just the poor shooting. But at its core, they're playing lineups with Roddy Gale, Reuben Jones, guys that are complete non-shooters alongside the two big look of Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. There's no spacing on this court. Defenses have figured it out. And when you combine Michigan's poor shooting and lack of offensive identity right now with my concerns with Purdue, if we see some wonky lineups, if we see Braden Smith's legs just give out at the end of another game, I think with the total, with where it was listed, with what I mentioned to you guys, 146.5, that feels like it's about 10 points too high to me, given what I've seen form-wise from Michigan in the last month. It's one of my stronger plays for Friday. Troy, what insights can you add for us?
Yeah, well, I can add this is that it is 146.5, and it actually opened at 148.5, which is about 20 points too high, in my opinion. Zero confidence in Purdue, and that is very recency bias based. Their last 2 or 3 games is really what I'm going off of, but couldn't agree more that it looks like Braden Smith has run out of gas, and can you blame him? He has carried the load of that team for much of the season before Trey Kaufman-Renn really turned it on and has had some sensational performances, putting himself into All-American, honorable mention candidacy. I think the under has to be the play here if you were to make a bet. I don't think right now I have zero confidence in either team to really perform at a high level based off of what I've seen from them recently. And the number at 2.5 is not a great number. It's not super juicy. The interesting thing is early money. It's very early money that's come in has been on Michigan to cover, and it's been pretty strong. And same with the tickets. About 85% of the tickets and about 78% of the money. And I think you'll see as we get closer to game time, obviously being the late game, that will shift. I wouldn't be surprised if this comes down to 1.5 or potentially even 1. And I think the market will dictate that. I think you're going to see a lot of money on Michigan, even though it's probably going to come for people who have not watched Michigan play the last month. They see the 3 next to their name. They see the 6 next to Purdue, and they're going to bet on Michigan. There's a little bit more of an identity to Michigan, even though Purdue played in the national championship game last year and had the best player in college basketball for the last 2 years. I could see money start to pour in on Michigan, which will even this thing up. I could not be further away from wanting to bet on this game from money line or spread, and probably not over under, but I do think it is going to be the rock fight of all rock fights in the conference of rock fights, which is the Big Ten.
Yeah, I will say, Troy, before we clicked record for this show, we were playing a little Bill Simmons Guess the Line, and you and I kind of looked at each other like, could this be Pick'em? That doesn't feel right, but what do you do with these two teams? So right. I think it landed at the right spot, Purdue minus 2.5, but if the public is jumping all over Michigan, you've got to have some courage somewhere deep within to want to take Michigan at any number right now. I would urge some caution there. All right, it's going to be another great day of hoops in our favorite conference in the Big Ten. Doug, hit us with your best bet for Friday before we get out of here.
I mean, I'd really like to do the under of whoever survives that Michigan game. So the winner of that game on Saturday, I'm taking the under in their team total or something like that. But for Friday, I'm going to go with Sparty. I just think that they're going to be ready for this game. Izzo will have them ready. I think Oregon will hang and want to compete. but I think Michigan State's just going to have too much talent, and this will be their game, and I think they're going to go through a couple runs to push this to double digits to extend the lead. And these are all pretty tight, but that's, I think, my favorite one.
I love when I agree with Doug because that's my second favorite play for Friday. My first favorite play for Friday is another one you agree with, Doug. I like the under in Michigan-Purdue. That's my strongest play on the card. Hopefully we can go 2 for 2 with big smiles on our faces. Gentlemen, this has been a fun week of handicapping the Big Ten tournament. I hope all of our listeners enjoy the rest of the games in this tournament. Stay tuned for more from us on another episode of The 10 presented by Bet Rivers.
Thanks for watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.